Last year, Vice debuted a new wrestling series, a docu-series called Dark Side of the Ring. And I reviewed a lot of those episodes here on the Sound Off. There was one on the murder of Bruiser Brody, which just got me so angry watching that. It was a great show, but just angering when you kind of recap what happened in that incident. The Von Erich family, which that whole family is a tragedy. The death of Gino Hernandez, Fabulous Moolah, a lot of good ones. A lot of good topics they covered last year, and I really enjoyed the series. And so did a lot of other people, because Vice picked it up for a second season. And now we have a premiere date for that second season. It is coming back on Tuesday, March 24th at 9 p.m. Eastern, which will be a 2-hour premiere. It's a double episode covering the Benoit family murder-suicide. Each week thereafter, the show will air on Tuesdays at 10 p.m. with Chris Jericho as the narrator for this season. He replaces Dutch Mantel, who narrated season 1. They're going to have actor and comedian Chris Benoit will be hosting a new after show at 11 p.m. each week following each new episode with a rotating panel of guests from the world, I guess, of wrestling and entertainment. They're going to talk about each episode after it airs. So very similar to what AMC does with Chris Hardwick hosting Talking Dead after every episode of The Walking Dead. He did the same thing with Breaking Bad. They called it Talking Bad. Very original. But I guess we're getting the after-show treatment for Dark Side of the Ring this year. The other 8 episodes this season, I wanted to just run through the list here and give a little background on each. All of them are going to be, I believe all of them are an hour each. The list is as follows. Now, this is not in any kind of air date order. So this order I'm reading this in doesn't mean anything. I'm just listing the different topics. Owen Hart. Owen Hart is getting an episode on this season. They interviewed his widow, Martha, for this special. That one and the Benoit one are going to be tough to get through because of the subject matter, but also because I think a lot of us, myself included, we lived through those times as fans. And so we all have our own memories of watching when it happened, or in the case of the Benoit stuff, kind of where you were when you read the news and it just tore your guts up. I can't imagine if you were actually a friend or a family member, what they must have been going through at that time. But the Owen Hart thing especially, I'll never forget that night for the rest of my life, or that walk home from my friend's house. Lived 6 blocks away from me. I was over at his house watching Over the Edge that night. And when the pay-per-view was over, I had to walk. It was a long walk home that night at 11 o'clock. And I remember walking in and, in the house, my brother had the local NBC newscast on. My mother was home too. They both were watching the news. It was right at 11 p.m. when the evening news comes on. And it was the lead story here in New York. I mean, this happened in, where were they? St. Louis? Kiel Center in St. Louis, I think. And it was the lead story probably across the country on a lot of newscasts at 11 p.m. And I remember walking in and seeing that. And I just lost it. Once reality had really set in that he was really dead, and just how stupid and how senseless it all was. And having met the guy, less than a year before that, I just lost it. And 2 little kids lost their father over a dumb stunt. So that's going to be a tough one to watch. New Jack. They've got to talk about the mass transit incident in ECW. I don't know for sure that they will, but I think it would be almost impossible for them not to at least mention it. How can they not? But in the trailer for the season, there's like a 60-second trailer on YouTube with different highlights from some of the episodes. In the trailer, they show footage, and the real focus is on the time that New Jack tried to murder Vic Grimes by tossing him off the scaffold at that XPW show. There can be no doubt his intent that night was to either badly injure or kill Vic Grimes. So, some backstory here. The two of them had worked a match together in ECW. ECW had a pay-per-view, I don't remember which one it was, but in 2000, there was an ECW pay-per-view, and there was a match involving New Jack and Vic Grimes. And they're up on a scaffold. The scaffold seems to be the common denominator here. And I don't know if it was actually a scaffold match, or if they just ended up on a scaffold. But they're up on a scaffold, and they're both supposed to fall off together. I guess that's the spot. That was the plan. They're going to fall off at the same time. Grimes, who's a big guy, he gets cold feet. Says, I can't do it. So New Jack grabs him. New Jack is hardly the most understanding person in the world. He grabs Vic Grimes, and he forces him off. And they both go flying off the scaffold. And they miss the tables that were set up down below. And they crash onto the floor, right onto the pavement. And in the process, Vic Grimes, who was a very large man, he landed right on top of New Jack's head. So as if the fall itself wasn't bad enough, you've got this guy who's probably every bit of, 350, 400, whatever he was, landing right on top of your head. He should have died. New Jack should have died on that fall. And he has said in interviews, he's claimed that he went blind in one eye because of that fall. He's been blind in that eye ever since. Anyway, fast forward a couple of years. ECW is dead. It's 2002, maybe 2003. They meet again in XPW, which is that's probably a whole other segment on the history of XPW over there. But you can search for the match online. New Jack versus Vic Grimes. This is an infamous incident. I remember seeing highlights of this years ago, and I just couldn't understand how this guy was not 6 feet under. They're up on a scaffold again. Stacks of tables are down below stacks, like 2 towers of tables have been set up down below in the ring to cushion the fall. These guys are so high up. They are way up there, scary high above the ring. And New Jack has not forgotten that Vic Grimes hesitated that night and fell on his head and blinded him in one eye, even though he didn't do it on purpose. So he grabs Vic Grimes to toss him off, which I guess was the plan, but he intentionally overshoots him with the intent of trying to either maim the guy or to kill him. I've heard him say that he wanted Grimes to land on the ring post and either break his back or snap his neck. I absolutely 100% believe that New Jack wanted to kill this man, because New Jack is a fucking psychopath. Now, if you watch it back, all these years, almost 20 years later, I still cannot believe that Vic Grimes did not die on that fall. I mean, he had a guardian angel looking over him that night. One of the scariest things in wrestling that I have ever seen. And this is coming from somebody who watched all of Monday Night Raw in 2019. One of the scariest things in wrestling that I have ever seen. Now, I don't know if they'll cover the mass transit incident in ECW, but that New Jack special is going to be something else. The things he's done to people in matches. I know people love to glorify, it's New Jack, The things that he has done to people in some of the matches that he's been in, far worse than even the mass transit stuff. He should have gone to jail for some of the shit that he pulled over the years. Then we have the death of Dino Bravo. This may be the one that I'm looking forward to the most. We first heard rumors about this last year, that they wanted the Dino Bravo episode, I think, to be part of season 1. But they had already started working on it. This is before they knew that there was going to be a season 2. So this has been in the works for a very long time. And I'm looking forward to this one. I remember my memory of Dino Bravo is from his time, probably like a lot of you, in WWE in the late 80s and the early 90s. And then he just disappeared. He vanished. And a few years later, he is shot to death at home while watching television. Execution style. He's executed. 17 times he was shot. I really hope they interviewed Rick Martel for this. Martel did a shoot years ago. And there's a few floating around with Rick Martel, but Martel doesn't really do a lot of interviews. He doesn't do a lot of shoots. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. He doesn't make a lot of appearances. My understanding is, I don't know if he's in real estate or what he's doing, but he got out of wrestling. He made a clean break many years ago and, found another career for himself and is very happy doing that. He did make an appearance. I know there was a WWE pay-per-view many years ago. I don't know if it was one of these Cyber Sunday shows or something. He was in the front row and I think he got physically involved. But you never see him brought in for any of these like Legends reunion type appearances, WrestleMania. He's not in the Hall of Fame. He absolutely deserves a Hall of Fame nod. But he seems to have pretty much made a clean break from the business and is doing well. But there is an interview that he did a number of years ago, and I don't remember if it was RF Video or High Spots. It was one of the two. He was very good friends with Dino Bravo, and he said WWE was going to let Bravo go because they just didn't have anything for him anymore. He kind of, I guess he used up his usefulness, and they were done with him. They were going to fire him. And Rick Martel went to Pat Patterson, fellow Canadian, and he asked, look, let me tag with Dino. We could be tag team partners. And Patterson just shut the idea down. He said, we're not interested. We're done with him. You know, he wanted to become partners with Dino, he said, because he knew him well enough to know without wrestling, he had nothing. And he knew that he would fall into bad habits. Dino is the nephew, I think by marriage, to one of the mafia bosses up in Montreal, who would tell Dino all the time, come work for me, come work for me. So when WWF got rid of him in 92, I believe, 92 is when they let him go, what did he do? He went to work for his uncle. He didn't have any money coming in. Martel said this is a guy who went from driving fancy cars and living this lavish lifestyle to having to borrow money from his mother. He was embarrassed. He was ashamed. He knew he could make good money working for his uncle. And that's where the stories about the illegal cigarette trade come from. I guess, the Indians own part of the river up there. He met with the Indians about smuggling cigarettes across the river. They were apparently very big wrestling fans. They knew him from TV, and they were, they figured he could help attract a lot of customers. So that did very well. In fact, that did so well that it got the attention of the Coke dealers. Now they wanted in on the action. And there was a shipment that got seized. I think a shipment of cocaine that got seized by the cops. Something happened. It was sitting in a warehouse, and it was supposed to be picked up for transport, and it wasn't. And then like 2 or 3 days later, the cops ended up seizing it. Not long after that, he was murdered. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. But his murder remains unsolved. Martel claimed that Bravo's wife had taken their daughter to ballet class. They got home and they discovered the crime scene when they got home. She was holding their daughter. Thankfully, the daughter was sleeping. But imagine you're the wife walking in. There's blood everywhere. There's blood on the floor. There's blood on the ceiling. The walls. The guy was shot 17 times. I've heard 10 times, 17 times, maybe 17 shots, 10 connected, something like that. But he got shot a lot. Maybe they were able to find his wife for this special. Maybe even his daughter. How old would his daughter even be by now? I don't know. She's an adult now. Maybe they were able to find them. Get interviews with them. Nobody's ever heard from them. I don't think they've ever talked publicly about what happened. But I at least hope they got Martel, because he's the only one who I've ever heard really give specific details as he knew them. Bret Harte in his book said that Dino once told him that he knew his days were numbered. It's kind of a sad story when you think about it. If this guy, wrestling was all that he had, and his own friends knew this and tried to, save his job, and they were like, yeah, we don't have anything for him. We're going to get rid of him. And then he just kind of ends up in this, look, he's an adult. He's a grown man. He made his own decisions, but that's kind of sad. That's a pretty sad story. So anyway, the content though, this content makes for prime, content for a TV show like this. So I am looking forward to that episode. They have one on Jimmy Snuka and the death of Nancy Argentino, his girlfriend at the time, his mistress, I should say. I've talked at length about this case here on the podcast. If you go back in the archives, he was guilty as sin. I'm sorry. He was guilty as sin. He got away with murder. There's not a doubt in my mind. I want to know what was in that damn briefcase that Snuka in his book said Vince McMahon was seen with when he showed up later on to meet with the cops at the police station. That's from Snuka himself. He put that in his book. Why he would do that, I don't know, because that just makes him look even worse. But I want to know what was in the damn briefcase. We may never know. It may end up being one of life's great mysteries. Dr. D, David Schultz. I didn't know they were working on an episode about him. He's getting an episode this season, I'm sure based around his very memorable run-in with John Stossel of 2020 back in 1984. Probably the end of 84. This was like a few months before the first WrestleMania. And it aired on 2020. again, probably not long before WrestleMania. Stossel was backstage here in New York at Madison Square Garden, where all the big WWF shows back then were held, and he was interviewing Schultz and told him, I think this is fake. I think he did it in the context of, like, let me pose this question to you. Let me ask you a common question, a common refrain from people about professional wrestling. I think it's fake. And Schultz open hand slapped him across the ear. Both ears. He actually hit him twice. Once, I think, in the left ear, once in the right ear. It's John Stossel, so I'll allow it. He probably had it coming. Not a fan of John Stossel. So he hit him twice, and of course, he was fired for it. Maybe. He may have actually been fired for something else. You know, he may have been fired for trying to start a fight backstage with Mr. T at a time when WWE was working with Mr. T and was going to use him, wanted to use him for WrestleMania. And Schultz started some shit with him, and that actually may have been what he was really fired for, but everybody just assumes he was fired for the 2020 thing. He wasn't. If he wasn't fired right away. It did not happen right away. He's always claimed that the company told him. I don't know if Vince himself did, but he said the company told him to hit Stossel. But I wonder about that. You know, you've got John Stossel, who at the time is a reporter for this news magazine show 2020, and they've done investigative pieces on there before. What was the basis of the segment, I wonder? Were they misled into thinking they were doing some kind of puff piece on pro wrestling? I don't know that 2020 was known for their puff pieces back then. They had to know that there was a question coming like that. I would not rule out the possibility that, you know, maybe Schultz was set up. You know, maybe he was told, hey, look, if this guy asks that question, you got to put him in his place here. You got to teach him some respect about the business. Otherwise, why would you put John Stossel together with David Schultz and expect that that's going to end well? The Road Warriors, Hawk and Animal, they're getting an episode devoted to them. I don't know if it's going to focus on anything specific. It's kind of random, but there'll be a Road Warrior show. Herb Abrams, our old buddy Herb Abrams. This one's going to be interesting. I've talked about Herb before. He was quite the character. Founded the UWF promotion back in the early 90s. Not the same UWF that Bill Watts used to run. But the episode is going to look at his attempts to build a wrestling empire for himself. I mean, this is a guy who had a jobber on his TV shows named Davey Meltzer. Called him Davey Meltzer as a way to get back at Dave Meltzer for writing negative things about him in The Observer. Has there been any one person in the wrestling business, maybe outside of Vince McMahon, who has gotten more hate from people over the last 30 years than Meltzer? Holy shit. We hear his name thrown around a lot lately, and this is going back to 1990. These promoters were so gotten to by The Observer, they were naming jobbers after him on TV. And anyway, Abrams famously or infamously, he died of a heart attack. He was in police custody at the time, and he died. This was after he was found naked, covered in baby oil and grease, with cocaine all over his body. There may have been prostitutes present at the time as well. This should be fun. And last but not least, the Brawl for All. In 1998, in WWF is going to be covered as well. All of the injuries that came out of it. I know they interviewed Vince Russo at his house last year, but they never finished the episode in time for season 1, so they are using it now here in season 2. Honestly, this sounds like the weakest of the bunch. I can't say that I really care all that much about them talking about the Brawl for All. I think this episode to me sounds like it is to season 2 what the Montreal Screwjob episode was to season 1. But they do a good job with these, so maybe it'll be entertaining. If there is a season 3, I was thinking about what other topics would I like to see them cover. I've jotted down a few of them here. And feel free to chime in and tweet me or, post on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. And let me know which subjects maybe I missed here that you think would be good subject matter. But they should cover the early 90s sex scandals in WWE. There were a bunch of those. Mel Phillips, Terry Garvin, Pat Patterson. I mean, that just seems like prime content for a show like this. Vince McMahon's appearance on the Donahue Show also. All that stuff. You could do a two-parter on that. The steroid trial in 1994. an episode on the Dynamite Kid, I think would be just brutal, given that guy's history. But he is a big figure in wrestling history. He's one of these guys that people grew up idolizing and kind of patterning themselves after. And, Davey Boy may be going into the Hall of Fame solo this year. You could argue, why not Dynamite? And there's a lot of reasons why. I can understand them not wanting to put him in. But I think an episode devoted to him would be interesting. Maybe Magnum TA's car accident and what might have been with him in the NWA had he never gotten hurt. The life and death of Brian Pillman, I think, could make for a fascinating episode. And that's just to name a few. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other ones I'm not thinking of. So again, feel free to chime in if I missed any. And hopefully they can round up a bunch of interesting ones for season 3. I'd like to see the show continue on. So a lot of different subjects they can cover when it comes to wrestling. A lot of dark shit that I think deserves the documentary treatment here on this series.